Doing a special edition of the World Edition on this particular day. I know a lot of times we've been talking about things dealing with issues around the world, and here in North Carolina, we've been dealing with this rain, but a lot of people have been paying attention to global issues and all in that space. Of course, they're paying to political issues as well, as a number of folks are following their favorite candidate, whoever that may be, and seeing how they are doing in the presidential races and all in that space. But one thing that we know people have been talking a lot about is China, its involvement in politics, both on a global level as well as its own economics, as well as its social media, and kind of the impact that that has had on society as well. So we're very fortunate today to have a guest, Mr. Bradley, James Bradley, who has done some work in that space and definitely has some understanding of China and its mentality and a number of other things along those ways. So I'm going to bring in Mr. Bradley. We'll have a conversation about some of the things that he's observed and maybe even his own thoughts about Mr. Blinken's recent trip that is taking place over there in China, and maybe which way we should be going in our direction with involvement with China, because China is definitely a world power. Of course, Russia has been ingrained in that battle in Ukraine. So some people may say that China is the second power behind the U.S. And some people may even argue that it is the major power. But that is something that I'll be curious to see what Mr. Bradley has to say and all along those lines. So I want to bring in Mr. Bradley and see some other things that he's got going on. He's actually coming to us from Saigon on this particular day and all in that kind of way. So, Mr. Bradley, I was glad you were able to arrange to make this appearance after I heard about you from RTIR and some of the other news services that are out there and all along those lines. So if you'll just share a little bit with our Pod TV audience about your own experiences in the world arena and how you got involved into it, and some of your thoughts around what I mentioned, which is China as a world power.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I was born in Wisconsin many years ago. My father fought on Iwo Jima, and it was one of the guys who helped raise two flags on Iwo Jima. I went to school in Japan. I eventually wrote the book Flags of Our Fathers, which was produced into a movie by Steven Spielberg and Clint Eastwood. An actor played me in the movie. They didn't want me in the movie. I was too handsome. I'd unbalance everything. You know how it is, Jeff. And then I wrote three other books. My last book is called The China Mirage. And I'm out here in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, right underneath China. So since the 1970s, I've been out here in Asia, in and out. So I know America and Asia, and happy to be here.
Glad that you're here as well and all in that space. And yes, Mark is the name and actually produced for Jeff, which is what you saw earlier and everything, but that's no problem there either. But one of the things I was curious about is you mentioned the fact that you grew up in Wisconsin. And by the way, I went to Marquette, so I definitely know that Wisconsin lifestyle and everything, so that you always know that you're going to be involved in the diplomatic lane when you first got into adulthood, or is this something that came about later? And did you follow your father's footsteps in the sense of being in the military?
Oh, no, no, none of that. I went to school in Japan in 1974. That's the equivalent of someone today going to Afghanistan or Pakistan. Japan was relatively unknown. I was a cheesehead. I thought I was going to China, old newsreels of China. I just went there. I went to the University of Notre Dame. They had a program in Japan, and I went to it. So it was accidental. It wasn't until decades later that my father died and we found his secret boxes about Iwo Jima. So that's a whole different story. But after going to school in Japan, I hitchhiked around the world when I was 21. By the time I was 23, I had been in 23 countries. So I've been traveling around the world quite a bit, and now it's a few years later.
We won't hold the Notre Dame against you, because when I was at Marquette in the early 80s, that was definitely one of our arch rivals and all along those lines, because I was there when Doc Rivers was there, and definitely Notre Dame and Marquette have always had that rich Jesuit history and all in that space. So we won't hold that against you. The fact
Yeah, no, I have long felt sorry for you Marquette guys.
Yes, I'm sure you probably think that Notre Dame was the better one and everything. What is your thoughts about this particular trip and all along those lines? Because I know that a lot of people, and I kind of alluded to it, have thought that China is exerting its power as a global power, and we know that sometimes we hear about old colonialism, and some people might even argue that that is what China is doing, the way that it is, investing in places both in the U.S. as well as around the world. Africa comes to mind, but Asia comes to mind as well. But what are your thoughts about the Chinese intentions, for lack of a better term?
Well, the Chinese intentions, let's just measure it by world popularity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if someone is voted most popular in high school, they must be popular. And
Yeah.
you might not like that person, but a lot of people do. If you look at the world right now, they're turning towards Beijing. They're turning away from Washington. They're turning away from the dollar. They're turning away from the US military. And they're turning towards Beijing, the BRICS, the Silk Road. People are signing up for this, and it's not getting enough coverage in the United States. You know, Biden goes to a meeting and 7 guys show up. Putin calls a meeting and 97 countries come. So the tectonic plates are shifting. And in terms of Blinken's trip to China, the US press said that he was going to China to help repair US China relations. I'm sorry to report to the Americans that Blinken went to the wrong country. You know, you've got to buy him some GPS or maps. If he wanted to repair US China relations, he should have gone to the United States. He should have gone to TV studios in New York and Washington. The problem is in the American mind. When Blinken came to Beijing, the Chinese said, hey, all this war over Taiwan, Taiwan's part of China. You guys agreed to this 52 years ago with Henry Kissinger and Nixon. Kissinger's 100 years old. It's been your policy since the 1970s. But if you watch CNN or MSNBC, you get the idea that Taiwan's a separate country. No, Taiwan's part of China, like Wisconsin's part of the United States. So Blinken, your idiotic press is misleading America. We want you to get in front of the microphone and just restate American policy. So Blinken goes out and says, Taiwan is part of China. And listen to this. Senator Marshall Blackburn says, Blinken flew to communist China to appease Xi and state that the Biden administration does not support Taiwan's independence. When is this administration going to stand up to bullies and stand up for freedom? I mean, this is ridiculous. Blinken was only saying what American policy is, but this shows you how Americans are being misinformed. They're being told Taiwan is a separate country, which it is not. It is part of China, and we have acknowledged that for 52 years.
Well, along those same lines, I know a lot of times when people think of China, they think about its influences. Like I mentioned earlier, I know that China has definitely been going to a lot of African nations, and it seems like they're investing in those nations. Even here in the United States, you will oftentimes hear about people that are looking at some of the Chinese corporations and buildings in the United States and everything along those lines. So I know that some of my conservative friends are sometimes concerned about that, but what are your thoughts? Is that something that we should be worried about if people are buying land, even here in the United States, from Chinese companies buying land as well as buying them in the African nations, the Latin American nations, the Asian nations, the various nations in the various continents?
That's completely up to America. America has its own laws. They can encourage foreign investments. They can, if American laws encourage you to buy land in America and you're getting rich, why wouldn't you buy land in America?
Right.
I mean, America can take care of its own border. They can, I don't get that one. If I'm a billionaire and I want to buy a farm in the United States and it's legal, what's wrong with that?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's what a lot of folks need to be doing. And like I said, I know that some folks have been feeling that China is exerting undue influences on other countries. But I'm kind of like you. I'm like, if you are a developing nation and you have a resource, whether that is lithium, as is the case in some African nations, or whether that's oil, because I actually know somebody from Uganda that has her own oil company and everything, and the folks in China want to buy your merchandise, then it seems logical that you would want to sell to those that want to buy whatever you are selling, whatever that product may be, particularly since you may be a developing nation. Mm-hmm.
But let's make it real simple. Let's take Africa. Let's take Africa over, let's say, the last 30 years. America's approach to Africa has been to go into the government and say, don't you have some terrorists somewhere out there in the bush? What you need is an American base. You need American drones. You need military guys. And we're going to build a base, and you're going to buy arms from America, and we're going to militarize this. And our outreach to America has been mostly militaristic through AFRICOM. The way China did it is, China, you want to go to Africa, and I mean, go ahead. And Chinese walked over to Africa and said to the Africans, what do you need? Shirts, bras, tennis shoes, sunglasses, cell phones. What do you need? You need cell phones and glasses and candy. And okay, we'll open a shop, and we'll import things from my aunt in China and put them on the shelves and charge you for it. And, they started out as small entrepreneurs. And now Africa and China, that's the number one trading relationship with Africa is China. Why isn't that the United States? Why didn't American entrepreneurs go to Africa and ask them what they wanted? It's the same thing with the Japanese. I'm old enough to remember when there were not Toyotas in America. Toyota came over, and people don't remember the first Toyotas were a failure. They didn't work in the American market. So Toyota did interviews with America. What don't you like about Toyotas? What do you like? What would you like improved? They went back to Japan. They improved the product. Let's try again. That didn't work. 3 years of failure. Okay, how about this? How about that? And finally, they made a car good for the American market, trial by error. How come we're not selling cars in Japan? How come we're not selling cars in Munich and all over Africa like the Chinese are? So, this is an entrepreneurial situation that America has fallen down on. The African countries are not being bamboozled and controlled by debt bondage, as the American press is saying. The Africans have free choice who they're going to deal with, and they want to deal with China. And, I'm not promoting China. I'm an American. I wish Wisconsin entrepreneurs had walked over to Africa and said, what the hell do you want? And we will supply it. We'll make it. We'll make a factory to make it. And we will become Africa's largest trading partner. And Wisconsin will get rich trading with Africa. But we didn't do that.
Yep. Along those same lines, I was just wondering, because one of the other complaints that I've heard people make, and it's not one that I necessarily agree with, but sometimes people will say that we open ourselves up too much in terms of our education to Chinese population, everything. Because one of the complaints that I've heard, once again, from some of my conservative friends is that why should a Chinese student get a benefit to come and get educated in America, because we supposedly have the better education system, and then get that degree and then go back to his own country and develop it there when he got the degree from here. Because I've heard that complaint, because apparently there are some loans, and I know that there are loans for different people from different parts of the world. But I'm just wondering, as one that went through education yourself in a foreign area and everything. What is your answer to those that make that complaint? And by the way, I have a neighbor that's actually upstairs. I live in an apartment complex, and he's actually a Chinese medical student because I actually don't live that far from Duke University. But what is your complaint when you hear people that make that complaint that, that it's that old narrative of they come over here, they get the education, then they go back home?
Jeff, it's just you hang around with too many people from Marquette. I think that's the problem here, And I knew you were Jeff, but I'm sitting here with no glasses, and the name Mark is right
so
on.
That's it. It's actually Mark. Jeff is the guy
is right on your screen. So but Jeff, I don't know. All these complaining Americans, do something about it. Cut the educational ties. I don't know. Go up to New England. Those headmasters up there are on airplanes to Japan, Korea, and Beijing all the time, recruiting extremely wealthy families, and they're making a fortune. So you don't like that? Cut it off. You're an American, change the laws. You don't want to open American universities to foreigners? Change the laws. No one's doing anything illegal. I'm rich. I live in Shanghai, let's say. I'm Chinese. I want my kid to go to Oxford or Harvard, and I pay for it. It's an open system. I don't know what to say. It isn't like the Chinese, Koreans, or Japanese are bribing people to come to the American universities. They're wide open and they're doing what's legal.
Now that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the other countries that you think that folks should be looking at other than China from the Asian landscape? You've mentioned that you're there in Saigon, and I know that some friends of mine have gone to Vietnam. And of course, we know that, as you mentioned, Japan is definitely a world power and specifically an economic world power. But what are your thoughts about some of the places that we should be looking at and everything?
If Blinken, let's say Blinken goes to Beijing for 2 days, and then he goes to the UK for 5 days, and then he goes to, people get the idea. You can say, China, Cambodia, Italy, Venezuela, and no. When you say the word China, you're saying almost 1/4 of humanity. Mm-hmm. You're talking about the civilization that has been the number one most powerful force in the world for most of world history. And Americans, got to get their heads screwed on. What we need is more Americans going over to China. Jeff, where are you? What city are you in?
Durham, North Carolina, where Duke is. I'm literally right around the corner from Duke University.
So there's homeless around you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
Okay, well, if people from Duke University would go to Shanghai, there's no homeless. I'm in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, Vietnam. And people, you're in like a up and coming poor country. No, I'm not. San Francisco's a poor country. They got people living below the poverty line on the street, defecating on the street. I'm in Saigon. You come out with me. You can't find anybody living on the street in this city. There's 5 million people here. There's nobody living on the street. Women are not afraid of walking around here at 10, 11 at night. What would they be afraid of? They can't imagine it. Look at the American cities. America's got to get their stuff together, withdraw the military. We've got 1,000 bases around the world, and we're spending money. We're talking about war with China. The military generals are at the Council of Foreign Relations talking about, it looks like war might be coming. It's ridiculous. Taiwan's part of China. 50% of the Taiwanese want to reunite with China. If the American military withdrew from this region, they would reunite. My daughter lives in Taipei. Repeat, my daughter lives in Taipei. She has no concern about China and Taiwan reuniting. They're almost reunited now. There's so much business being done. I said, what would happen when China reunites with Taiwan? She said, maybe my driver's license would change color, but I'd be in the same apartment with the same clients. I'd take the same subways, and, not much would change. So the General Eisenhower was right in 1961 when he said America's biggest problem is the military industrial complex, and they are propagandizing America into war. I'm out here in Asia. We don't have homeless. We don't talk about war out here. No one's fearing China. There's this Chinese aggressiveness is a China mirage. That's my last book. The China mirage lives in the American mind. The problem between the US and China is not out here in Asia. It's in Washington.
Yeah, I can definitely believe that. What do you say to folks that are also trying to paint China as another version of the boogeyman, if I can use that term, and everything because of its influence on social media? Because a lot of times they will look at TikTok, which is definitely a Chinese-run company, and try to paint that as part of the negative influence of the Chinese business model and everything, because of the fact that that is a major player. I mean, of course, we've got major players too, like Facebook. But what is your thoughts? And do you ever hear people make that conversation as well? And I've got another one about spirituality, because that's another one that I hear sometimes. And they're not all Marquette people. Sometimes they're Duke and Central and other folks as well. So I have to teach you back about that.
But the crazy ones are from Marquette, right? That you would admit that. I don't know. I mean, these poor Americans, they have no ability to write their own laws. I mean, Google was, worming its way into China, trying to do these psyops, and China cut off Google. America has the right to cut off anybody they want. But if Americans think that they are not being manipulated and data mined by American companies, I mean, you really think Facebook is a private company that Mark Zuckerberg made up in his Harvard dorm? 2 days before Facebook opened, DARPA, a division of the Defense Department, shut down its own Facebook. And then all of a sudden, Mark Zuckerberg, I mean, come on. The internet was designed and invented by the Defense Department. Every American is being psyoped and data mined and spied on by all these American apps. So, I would, if I was an American, I'd start with those, outlaw Facebook.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that sometimes people get confused about, and I don't know your own spiritual background. I consider myself more spiritual than religious, but I do hear sometimes that folks want to think that they're going to convert. You just mentioned the population, all 1 billion of the Chinese and all in that space. And I know it's a billion plus and all along those lines, but that is a large portion of the population. And I do know that I guess that was part of the conversation with Chiang Kai-shek, was the notion that we were going to Christianize that nation. And I know that there have been crusades and other attempts as well, but it doesn't seem like it's gone all that well in that part of the world, because I think a number of the folks there still practice some very Eastern religions, whether that is Buddhism or Hinduism or a number of other things. But I was just wondering, what are your thoughts, or how do you say when you run across those evangelicals that are thinking that are part of their solution is to change their spiritual belief system?
That's again the China mirage. That's in America. Those people are in America imagining things in their head. I mean, I don't know, come to Vietnam, you want to talk about Christianity or anything you want to talk about, go ahead. But this society is predominantly Buddhist. There's you can be Christian, you can go to church this morning. The Notre Dame is I can see it right over here, Notre Dame Cathedral. They have beautiful services. I mean, come to church if you want. But the idea that you're going to convert the Chinese or Asian population to a Western religion majority, I mean, that's just a mirage.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that and everything. We have a show, and the gentleman is actually originally, he lives in Canada now, but he was originally born in Ukraine, and definitely is not a supporter, and I don't blame him, because I'm not a supporter either of Putin and that invasion and everything. But sometimes folks will be frustrated at China or India because apparently they are not being as vocal as they would like them to be in supporting the Ukrainians. So I was just wondering, as you are traveling around the Asian countries, what your thoughts are about that, because I do know that there are folks that are supporting Ukraine and are wanting those nations that have not been as vocal, namely China and India, to be more vocal in their non-support of the Putin invasion.
Well, the only place that Ukraine is really big and powerful is in the United States media. If you go to Europe and look on the ground, like look at the real videos, the real reports, Ukraine is not much of a country with hardly any army. The main business there is corruption. They just caught the chief judge stuffing millions of dollars in pickle jars. So, Ukraine is a huge issue in the United States, but out here we can see more clearly that there's almost not going to be a Ukraine in a few months.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I'm sure that some of those companies will be companies from the Asian theater that will be part of the rebuilding, whatever rebuilding is done in what was or is still considered Ukraine, and all along those lines. So I imagine there are already Asian companies, just like there are already American companies that are putting their bids in for those contracts to rebuild, much in the way that they rebuilt Japan and rebuilt Germany. So I'm thinking some of those corporations are already putting their bids in for that rebuilding process. Because every time you look on the news, there is those massive destruction. So I agree that it looks very much a land that has lost a lot of its, not just population, but a lot of its infrastructure, buildings, and everything else. There may be a couple of cities that have survived the onslaught, but not many. So I'm thinking that a lot of folks will be needing to do that rebuild, and I'm thinking they will be coming from all aspects of the world, including China. Would you agree with that? That there will be some Chinese engineers and others that will be trying to look at the rebuilding efforts?
Yeah, the big story in the world, I'd ask, it's hard to do this without a map, but
What?
if Americans, not the people from Marquette, but the other people, if they could imagine, like Alaska down to Mexico, that chunk of land, it looks like this. Now imagine what is called the Great Island by strategists. Go from England to Japan. Go from Shanghai to Paris. Go from Beijing down to India, Iran, Kazakhstan, all the stands. So that huge chunk of land, which includes China and Russia and India and Iran, that is called the Great Island. It's the largest landmass in the world. And this is what we're talking about. What China and Russia have said is, let's build a Great Silk Road. Let's connect this all with railways and internet and communications and air hubs and whatever. And we will unite this great island, Kazakhstan, Iran, Turkey, visualize the great island. Well, if you get a PhD in global studies out of Princeton and you become a neocon and you serve the Obama or Blinken administrations, you learn that you've got to interrupt that great island. You cannot allow progress. So you invade Afghanistan to try to split the great island in two. Take a look at a map. So you spend 20 years trying to split the great island so that China and Russia can't knit it together. Oh, got kicked out of Afghanistan. Then let's do this. Let's go in the South China Sea on one side and then Ukraine on the other side. We're fighting for the great island. We're fighting on the outside of it. So that's where America is spending trillions of dollars over decades trying to interrupt the progress of humanity on the great island. If we'd leave it alone, we could network our own continent. There should be super trains going from New York to Los Angeles in a few hours. You should be able to get from Miami to Seattle, boom, 300 Ks a minute. I mean, let's go. Our airline industry is just dilapidated. I'm scared of flying into JFK again. What a mess. There's people living in American streets. We have the opportunity to network and mine our own great country and become extremely successful, but we're not doing it. We're fussing around with other people and we're going to lose. We're going to spend trillions of dollars trying to interrupt the Great Island. But someday, Russia, China, Iran, India, that's billions of people. They're going to put that Great Island together. And America, instead of number one, is going to be number 4 or 5. I hate to say it, but we have the opportunity. Where's that super train going from Washington to Miami? Boom! Get on it. You know, I went Shanghai to Beijing, and the stewardess gave me a cup of tea. I'm on a train, and the tea was flat. It didn't even, didn't even jiggle. I couldn't even see like a little tiny wave. This is a true story. Boom! I'm going 300 Ks an hour. I flew to New York 2 weeks later. I had to give a speech in Boston. I took Amtrak. It was derailed. I was out on I-95 hitchhiking with a bunch of executives with briefcases.
Wow.
And Amtrak, when you go on it, click, 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 click. You can't even write on your computer. It's 19th century. Let's go, folks. Go to Shanghai, then go to Chicago. Let's look like Shanghai. Go to Hiroshima. We bombed it flat. That's a modern hot city, Go to Los Angeles. It's falling apart. There's 60,000 homeless in Los Angeles living under bridges. We got to do something about it. There's no homeless out here in Vietnam. It's possible.
Yeah, it sounds like it's very possible. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how many people want the infrastructure, and that's one of the things that people oftentimes talk about is a better infrastructure, including rail and including higher speeds and all of that. And it seems to me that a lot of countries, particularly those in the Asian nations, but even some of the European nations, have done a better job of getting those systems going. But my understanding, and it comes down to that notion of politics, is that sometimes there are forces that have their own selfish reasons, and I don't even understand all of the reasons. But I know here in Durham there has been talk of having light rail, and I think Charlotte does have light rail, but Durham is being halted because of the forces at Duke, because I guess they're not getting enough money, or maybe they want their people to drive in. I'm not sure what their reasoning is, but they are a major force for stopping that light rail from happening and everything that you are envisioning. So that would be light rail from Durham to maybe Durham to Charlotte.
Jeff, where are the demonstrations in Duke against the $200 billion we just gave to Ukraine?
Good point.
My point is not light rail and homelessness and LA to all these little ideas. My point is America has got to look at its budget. People say, well, James, yeah, you're focused on the military. No, I'm not. Look at the US budget. Our number one expense is the military. Everybody listening, that's what you agree. Well, you're paying your taxes. You're saying yes to that system. You're saying I'm an American, and the number one thing I need to do is hand most of my tax money over to the generals and the admirals. I'm an American. Forget this democracy, freedom stuff. What you are supporting, number one, is the military. So let me tell you a story. I wrote a lot about World War II. Right. In World War II, we had 7 5-star admirals and generals running 12 million men. Got it? 7 bosses, 12 million around the world, and we won. Now we lose every war we get into. We have 54 bosses, generals and admirals, running about 1 million men. Can you see the problem? Yeah. Folks, you're dishing out huge amounts of money to an inefficient situation. Pull back. RFK says, let's pull back those 1,000 bases around the world. Folks, how come if you have 1,000 bases around the world, by the way, no one knows the number. So you might say Bradley's wrong, 750. No, it's 802. No, it's 916. Nobody knows the number because many are secret. Mm-hmm. But folks, if these 1,000 bases around the world, if we have so many bases around the world, how come you're not seeing programs day after day about them? Completely secret, kept from you. Right. They learned in the 1960s, don't put the military on the screen because people will get upset. So somehow they fooled you to pay most of your taxes to support the military, which Eisenhower, not me, but a 5-star general, president of the United States, said, watch out. Don't give your money to that machine. And you're giving your money to that machine. And what China is saying is just back off. We're not fooling around in San Francisco. China's not, you know, right off the coast there in the Carolinas. What are you doing out here with all your ships and all your surveillance and your nuclear weapons? Let's calm down. Let's do trade. We're talking peace out here in Asia. The only time we hear war is when it's coming from America.
Wow. And what would you say? You kind of alluded to it earlier, to the media's role in that, because you did mention, and I do remember that famous shooting of the gentleman in the Vietnam War, that everybody saw that image, and it definitely fueled some of the anti-war conversation and all in that space and all in that kind of way. But I don't see as much of that in the media as it used to be in my mind and everything. So do you think that the media is somewhat being complacent in their non-coverage of what is going on in the military?
The media is not complacent. The media is owned by that machine. Mm-hmm. The media is doing its job. It's serving that machine. It's not talking about the realities of war. It's not showing the seamier sides. You know, I'm out here in Asia. How many admirals got fired out of the U.S. Navy for a huge bribery and sex scandal out here? Look it up. Just type in admirals, sex bribery scandal, Asia. But Americans don't know about it. Americans are unaware of the 1,000 bases encircling the world. How, you know, to people watching this, how many times has NBC, ABC, CNN shown you maps of all the bases we have choking China? Mm-hmm. Look at the documentary, The Coming War with China by John Pilger. I am in it. The Coming War with China, John Pilger. It's on the internet. And he'll show you the maps of the billions of dollars you're spending to choke China. But Americans are unaware of it. The media is not a separate entity. It is part of the machine.
Well, along those same lines, we will wind down very shortly and everything. And I definitely think you're giving some great insight that more and more people need to know about, and all along those lines. But you mentioned earlier that you had written that book about your father, and that you should have been the star, but they couldn't handle your charm and everything else along those lines.
A lot of things, Jeff. There was a charm, good looks. Yep.
Yeah. But that being said, I don't know if your dad's still living, but if he is, what would he think about what is going on now, and what would his reaction be to your involvement in these spaces and everything? Because it does sound like you are definitely very eloquent in your case against what is going on and all in that space. But what would your dad's reaction be, or did he start having similar kind of views when he was living, or maybe he's even still living and all in that space?
Oh, no. My father fought for American freedom. He didn't fight for military dominance. My dad fought for democracy. I want democracy. I don't want, military control of the media. I don't want the censorship that's going on in the United States. I don't want the one-party control that's going on in the United States. I don't want political prisoners in the United States. I want freedom and democracy, everything my father fought for. I grew up in my father's America. It was a wonderful America. We didn't have the word homeless. Mm-hmm. America's richer now than it was when I was born. When I was born, we didn't have homeless. Something's going on, folks. Open your eyes. It's possible to have a country as big as China and small as Vietnam with zero homelessness. No. Why do you, America, have homeless? Look at it. Stop looking out at the problems around the world, and telling Moscow and Beijing what to do. They're going to do what they want to do. Tell Chicago and Los Angeles and Miami what to do. And that's clean up their act. I'm an American and I want my father's America.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned political prisoners, and sometimes people don't want to believe that they exist, but I do know that they exist because I know that there are members of MOVE, members of the Black Panthers, members of AIM, and a number of other organizations that are sitting in prison because of their political stances and all along those lines. But sometimes we like to think that that's something that happens over there and doesn't happen over here. So I just wondered, at what point did you realize that we had political prisoners here in the United States? And like I said, I just named a few organizations. I'm sure I could think of others as well and everything. But at what point in your life did you realize that there was such a thing as political prisoners in the United States?
Well, we could get into it, but there are political prisoners in the United States. And, I'm a guy of the 60s and 70s. And I mean, let's have open debate. It's not going to break your head. I mean, we're censoring each other, and there's hate speech, and you can't say this and you can say that. And screw all that. Let's say what we want. We're a family. We're America. We're the democracy is supposed to be strong enough that anybody can say anything. Why is RFK being censored on the Democratic side? Why is Trump being censored on the Republican side? Let them get on stage. If they're idiots, then we'll vote them out as idiots. If they have good ideas and we like them, we'll vote them in. That's the American way. So, we need to get back. I don't want to say back, but we need to move forward with real American values. And that's openness, and that's freedom, and that's a lot less military control, more money for the people. Look at China is building bridges and America's building bases, and the world doesn't like that. And this isn't James Bradley talking. Take a look at where the world is going. They want to go on the BRICS road. They want to go on the Silk Road. They don't want to go on the American military road. So, I can die in 10 minutes. Doesn't matter what my opinion is. It matters what is the opinion of the world. America, take a look at the world.
You mentioned BRICS a couple of times, and I know that there's that notion that there might be a new currency, and that scares some folks because definitely Russia's involved in that, India, China, Brazil. There are a number of other nations as well. So, Mr. Bradley, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about BRICS as a currency, and is that something that you think we will see in the next several years and all along those lines? Because I've also heard some people that think that crypto might be even a new kind of a decentralized money as well. But I was just wondering your thoughts, particularly about BRICS, because I do know that India and China are very much involved in that, as is Brazil, Russia, and a number of other countries. I forget all the amount of countries that are involved, but I was just wondering, as one that does this research, what your thoughts are, and is the dollar heading into trouble?
Well, the bottom line is gold.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a historian. Gold is money. Every system reverts to gold. So all paper systems in the history of the world have gone to zero. Voltaire, the French philosopher, said, all paper money will reach its intrinsic value. What that means is, this is paper. Let's say this is a $100 bill. The value of this paper is zero. The value of the $100 bill, if you take it, out into the jungle and it has zero value. It's a con game. It's the confidence we have in the US dollar. So the bottom line is gold. Yes, we are going to see currencies that are going to be backed up by gold. And whether it's BRICS or the Fed does it or how it's going to happen, no one's calling me and telling me that. Okay. But if you want to get out of the paper system, and if you want to be in the future system, look to the past and go to gold. Yeah. Because that's what they're going to do. They're going to, they'll say this is the new system, this piece of paper, but it's going to be backed up by gold.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. You also alluded to earlier the notion of one party, and I do kind of agree with you that in a lot of ways, while there may be some differences with one party being maybe leaning more toward social issues and the other one leaning more toward fiscal issues and everything, I do think that there is a lot of lobby control and a lot of similarities between the Republicans and Democrats. I know that one of our fellow panelists that used to be the Comptroller General for um, both the Bush and I think the Obama administrations, if I remember correctly. But David Day Walker has been talking about this no label party and all in that space. So I just wondered, do you think that that is feasible as a world student? And do you think that we will get away from what a lot of people are saying is basically the same party, even if it might have different names and all in that space? So do you think we will get to a feasible third party, or are we going to be stuck with, like, as you mentioned earlier, Trump running against Biden this time around and all in that space, and maybe not enough of our youth voices being heard? So what is your thoughts as to the viability of a third party?
That's above my pay grade. Third parties haven't worked in America. It's a uniparty. It's a kabuki show. And Americans are, being fooled that they have a choice. The choice is, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, those are private corporations. People think, well, those are the arm of the government has nothing to say about the Republican and Democratic. They make their own rules. They have their own funding. They're both owned by corporations, and it's a kabuki show. So, good luck. Look at folks. Don't take my opinion. How is it working? How's the system working? Go to Shanghai, smell the streets. Go to Chicago, smell the streets. Get on a train, get on an airplane in various countries. Take a look, open your eyes. How is your system working? Something's broken. The world's largest meritocracy is the Chinese Communist Party. There's 90 million it's very difficult to get into the Communist Party. You got to be educated and qualified. And then to get to the top, you've got to run a neighborhood. Then you got to run a community. Then you got to run a city. Then you got to run by the time they get halfway up the ladder, they're running organizations bigger than Microsoft. Right. These guys run in China. They're PhD economists and engineers and mathematicians and, highly educated. We have bartenders in the House of Representatives. Joe Biden never had a job. He couldn't talk about the physics of building bridges or trains or whatever. We need to take a look, open our eyes at the condition of America and what is happening in China and other countries, and get back to the American way. We had a gold-backed currency. We had a lot of engineers. We had a lot of factories. We were the leader of the world in terms of freedom and in terms of productivity. We're not right now, but we can become. I caddied for Vince Lombardi, coach of the Green Bay Packers. Mm-hmm. When you win the Super Bowl this year, you're going to be awarded the Vince Lombardi Trophy. Right. He wanted excellence out of his players. That was the American way. America can get back to excellence, but we got to get going.
I mean, but isn't part of the problem, James, that we get into this otherness notion and everything, that, the other person, whatever that other person is, whether that's their orientation, their race, their whatever, is the evil force and all in that space? Because I think America has definitely gotten into a lot of that, where there's that blame on somebody that is different than you. And along those same lines, I have had friends of mine that have gone to some countries, not just in Asia, but in our own backyard, and they have been shockingly surprised by both the demeanor of the people as well as the cleanliness of the area and a number of other things. Because if you hear some of our politicians talk, you would think that Colombia is one of the worst places that you could ever go to, meaning Colombia in South America. But I've had at least one that is of Colombian descent and somebody that is not of Colombian descent. She's actually one of the co-owners of this network, and she was just blown away and was trying to go back to Colombia because she found those people to be very friendly, which a lot of times people don't think that they are friendly, and that they had clean streets, which you've mentioned about China and a number of other things. Now, I'm not saying just like there are not bad parts of America, I'm not saying there aren't bad parts of Colombia, but the image that is presented is not the image that they have come back and shared with others like myself and everything. So I was just wondering your thoughts about that, whether we get caught up in the negative stereotypes that exist of people, and maybe it's not as clear cut as some folks would have us believe.
Well, divide and conquer. If you want to rule, you divide and conquer. Mm-hmm. So there's a reason that there's 2 parties and not 7. So I'm a Democrat. I hate the Republicans. I'm a Republican. I hate the Democrats. Divide and conquer. I'm white and there's black, and I'm up and I'm down, and there's male versus female, and there's rich versus poor. And there's all these divisions in American society. And as long as the people are at each other's throats, divide and conquer, the conquerors can conquer because we're divided. We've got to come together. We've got to decide on one America and get it done. It's difficult to do because we got so rich. It's easier when you're poor, trying to claw your way out of poverty. When America was a poor country on the, hugging the East Coast of America, we were cash poor. We were an entrepreneurial country. Then after World War II, we got fantastically rich. And I have to say, my generation got kind of rich and fat and lazy. And we're looking to the past. We're thinking we're going to be number 1 all the time. But that's changing. I've been talking about this for about 20 years, how America's got to look and see that Asia is rising. People didn't listen to me 20 years ago. And if they're not listening to me now, then just, sit back, watch your 3 and 2 car garages collapse, watch your lifestyles collapse, watch the dollar go down 40% and wonder what's happening. Or you can wake up and start listening to people like Jeff.
Yeah. Along those same lines, who are some of the other regions of the world that you would like to see improved? And then, like I said, maybe give you a chance to tell folks about how you can be reached and your books that you might want to share, and all in that space as we're winding down. But what are some of the other regions of the world outside of Asia? I mentioned Latin America, and there might be, and you mentioned Africa. Are there certain regions of Africa or certain regions of Latin America, or just regions of the world that you think we as a world society should be looking at in terms of their growth and development?
Well, let's look at the whole world, but in terms of the number 1 force, I'm standing on it, the Great Island. And China, again, there's 1.5 billion people in China. There's about 1.54 billion people in India. So, I'm standing on an island with 3 billion people just in 2 countries. You add everybody else, Kazakhstan, all these stands, they are rising. They're working hard 7 days a week. Russia, look at a map of Russia. It's enormous. It's the largest land country in the world, and they're full of resources. That's why America's been trying to break them up to get those resources. Well, they're not going to break up Russia. You're not going to break up China. And America's forcing China and Russia together, which is a huge financial juggernaut. I don't know if Americans realize the Russian economy has never been stronger. Repeat, the Russian economy is booming. There's city planners who have never had so much money flushing in. They don't know what to do with it. America did them a huge favor by sanctioning Russia, and the economy is going really well. Russia's winning on the battlefield. I mean, hey, folks, can you live this day without Chinese products? You can't. And if you need some more products this week, you are going to buy them from China. China factories are booming. Vietnam is the fastest growing economy in Asia. we're making products for, you Americans and Europeans can buy. So, yeah, America should look at the world. But if you want to look at the number one most productive economies, you've got to look here to Asia, to the Great Island.
Yeah. And is that part of the reason you think that they're trying to divide that great island by getting China and India to go against each other? Because that's the other conversation that's been going on.
Oh, yeah.
We're trying to manipulate that relationship. Because I know that while Blinken was in China meeting with Xi, that I think that this is the week that Biden has been meeting with Mr. Modi and some of the leaders of India try to find some commonality, I think, on technology and other stuff. As a matter of fact, one of our hosts, Mr. Rao, I think has been part of some of those meetings since he's on the Morrisville City Council and is of Indian descent. But I was just wondering, is that part of the strategy is to kind of divide India against, or pit India against China?
Oh, yeah. We're divide and conquer. So we want India to be on our side against China. And, just look at the Great Island. It's divide and conquer all over the place. Just a few years ago, the Navy had a Pacific Command. We had a Pacific Navy. Now we have an Indo-Pacific. What? Indo-Pacific. We made up a new word that's all over the media. The Indo-Pacific Command. The Indo-Pacific. What does that mean? That means the U.S. Navy expanded from the Pacific into the Indian Ocean. What's the U.S. Navy doing? Why, Americans, why are you spending trillions of dollars of your taxes for the American Navy to get into the Indian Ocean and the Pacific and surround China with all those billions of bases? Why do you have 50,000 troops in Japan? Well, World War II ended why do we have, 50,000 troops plus support, plus families, plus teachers, plus janitors, plus? Why are you paying for 100,000 Americans to live in Japan on your tax bill? Why do you have 40,000 troops in Korea? What's the problem? China never invaded those countries. Japan invaded China through Korea with American support. Mm-hmm. You could take all those troops back. China's not going to invade Okinawa and Japan. That's not going to happen. You're listening to military media, and you're just getting your money sucked out. Take care of Chicago and Seattle and Miami.
I definitely agree with you on that. We got to take care of stuff in our own backyard, as you said, and I don't know what kind of success this particular meeting will have. I think that there'll be some maybe trade deals that are made with India on some of those products and everything, but I think that they will probably still have a serious relationship with China, even if they develop a more stronger relationship with us as well, because I don't think that they're going to.
Okay, but the bottom line is Biden doesn't know the name of people he's meeting with, and he's supported by neocons. So neocons are in charge, and the neocons say we're going to take care of Russia, then we're going to take care of China, because we're going to be number one. And they are completely loopy, crazy in their head, and it doesn't matter how many die. Hey, military guys are talking about drafting your sons and daughters to fight China, America. You better wake up and stop this before your daughters and your sons are being sunk on ships out in the Pacific.
That seems like that would be a fool's errand, to borrow one of your other phrases, and everything along those lines, because there are, as you just said, 1.5 billion people. And I remember doing some studies about the Mao Zedong approach to war and the approach to the military and everything. So I don't know that our couple of million, or however many our population is, could even be a match for the billions of folks that are over there in China. That just seems like the math doesn't add up and everything. But that maybe it's just me being overly logical and using that Marquette knowledge. But it seems like me that would not even work in that sense of the math of it.
Jeff, it doesn't. The problem is you're not running the show.
Right.
If you were running the show, you wouldn't be thinking about war with China. The neocons are running the show, and they are talking seriously about war with China.
Yeah.
I mean, I got the quotes right here from generals and admirals. We got to get ready. There's a slippery slope. The tensions with China have increased, and I'm afraid we're going to have to prepare for more. All those kind of words behind the scenes. There's a tremendous amount of money to be made fighting China. Forget the IUDs out in the Middle East. Obama and Secretary of Clinton said, pivot to Asia. What does pivot to Asia mean? It means there's a hell of a lot of money made to fight China. Satellites, Navy ships, technology, money, money, money. Secretary Clinton, let's pivot to China. Trump tried to stop it and people went nuts. The media torpedoed Trump. Trump shook hands with people in Asia. No way, man. We want war. Let's get Biden back in, and we'll get the Obama war machine going, and we'll get the Secretary Clinton machine going, and we'll get the Democratic war machine back up here. We'll crank that puppy up. So that's what it's all about. And if Jeff was in charge, we wouldn't be talking this nonsense. But we are talking nonsense right now.
It sounds like it a lot. Well, this has been a very enriching conversation. Definitely, I hope that folks have learned a lot, and definitely, I know we'll be airing it several times during the course of the weeks and months and everything. And hopefully, you can come back on. I know that there's that time difference and all into that space, but I have definitely enjoyed our conversation. But if you want to tell folks how you can be reached and any thoughts that you have about any products or books that you want to let folks know about, and if there is any final message that you want to give to our audience, now is the time to do that as well. But I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I know it's early morning, I think early Sundays there and everything, but definitely I've enjoyed our conversation, and I hope that you'll get a chance to come back and share more of your wisdom and knowledge that you have gained over these years of working with various folks, including your dad as well as others in the Chinese culture. But definitely, if you can tell folks how they can reach you and anything that you want to let folks know about how they can get the books that you alluded to, and any last message that you have just in general that you want to share with the world.
Well, I don't know about wisdom. I am from Wisconsin, so I doubt I gained any wisdom, Jeff. But I want to sincerely say that I'm so happy you have overcome all the impediments that you were thrown in your way at Marquette. And it was nice talking to you. I'm James Bradley. I'm author of Flags of Our Fathers and The China Mirage. And I can be reached at jamesbradley.com. jamesbradley.com. And Jeff, it was great talking to you.
It was good talking to you as well. And we're getting ready to get on out of here. And I, like I said, hope to have you come back on in the not too distant future. But I think you gave a lot of insights, and hopefully folks are listening to those insights and will enjoy the conversation. But right now we're getting ready to get on out of here. And I'll be sharing parts of these excerpts with some of our news folks, including some of our panelists, and they may have some thoughts as well. So who knows, they might even be emailing you. But I've definitely enjoyed our conversation and hope to have you come back in the not too distant future.
On Wisconsin.
On Wisconsin.